Hey, Larken Rose here, and I like to use weird analogies. If I was walking in the woods and I found someone like pinned under a tree that had just fallen on them and they could barely breathe and they couldn't get out from under it, and they said, "What am I going to do? Help!" What I wouldn't do is go up to them and say, "You should eat fewer sweets and no high fructose corn syrup, a lot fewer processed things. You should get regular exercise, not only cardio, but lifting is good. You should make sure you get enough sunlight." I wouldn't talk about any of that. I would focus on seeing if I could get them out from under the tree by either moving the tree or digging out from under them so I could pull them out. That would be my entire focus. Now, when they say, "What should I do?" all those other things are also true if they're concerned about their health. By the way, that doesn't mean I do a splendid job of doing what I should do, because I don't. But that would be my focus, because right there and then, that's the thing that matters. Now, I would compare that to the fact that there are a lot of cultural topics that a lot of people are talking about these days, as well they should be, which are really dang important, and I say almost nothing about them. And a lot of people might therefore conclude that I either don't care about them or I don't have an opinion about them. Neither of which is true. I have lots and lots of opinions about things that I don't talk about in public because they don't matter right now compared to doing away with statism, even though they very much matter in the long run. And there's this tendency of people, when they're stuck in the statist paradigm, to focus on what the law says or what the law shouldn't say or what should be repealed. And I wanted to briefly address a weird phenomenon that I see that's sort of the reaction. It's the flip side of the "there ought to be a law" mentality. There ought to be a law mentality is, well, accepting the premise that government is legitimate, which it isn't, but pretending I accept that premise, if there are choices that are better for humanity or for the individual or just generally better choices to make, a lot of people decide, well, the law should encourage people to make that. And there's a number of ways to encourage certain choices. One is threaten bodily harm if you don't make them. That's the usual way the law works. Like, if you have a habit that we decide isn't good, we're going to send a SWAT team to kick down your door and drag you away. And so, for example, a lot of people think, oh, drugs are so bad that they have to be illegal. And there have to be these laws. And government can also do it in less direct but still immoral ways. Like, well, we're going to rob all of you by way of taxation, but if you do certain behaviors and make certain choices, we'll give you like a tax cut, which is just a twisted backwards way of saying, we're going to rob you this much if you do what we want, and then we'll rob you this much if you don't do what we want. Well, that's just robbing people. It's still coercing people into making the choices you think they should make. And that's sort of just accepted by everyone who believes in government as a righteous thing. Like, if it's bad, it should be illegal. And if it's good, it should be allowed and maybe even subsidized. Like, government should throw money at it if it's good. So, and that's a bogus way of thinking. Unfortunately, there's sort of a leftover of that bogus way of thinking in the heads of a lot of pro-freedom people, including voluntarists who have given up the notion of government. They take the morally correct conclusion that the individual owns himself and nobody else should force anything on him or forcibly control his choices, and they do the flip side of "there ought to be a law" and basically conclude that, well, if there shouldn't be a law, if there shouldn't be government coercion, like outlawing or controlling a certain choice, well, that means it's perfectly good and nobody should criticize it. And it's like, it's a good, if it shouldn't be violently stamped out, then it must be good. And that's still status thinking, and it's colossally stupid. And it's frustrating to see. I mean, I expect statists to do this muddled thinking, but it's frustrating to see people who claim to believe in freedom, like anarchists and stuff, doing the same muddled thinking. So that if somebody is critical and said, doing drugs all the time and melting your brain, that's stupid. And if they respond, you have no right to tell me what to do. Well, they have no right to force you to make the decisions that they think you should make. That's true. But to decide that means the decisions must be good, if they shouldn't be violently stamped out, or that nobody should criticize them, or that there won't be a downside of making those decisions because you own yourself, that's just stupid. That's just really bad logic. Like, you have the right to do all sorts of idiotic things that are bad for you and aren't going to help you, aren't going to help the people around you, aren't going to make you be happy, aren't going to contribute to, like, your family being happy or the community being prosperous or a million other things. There's a bunch of choices you have the right to make, but all that means, all a right actually is, the only sane definition of that is, that's a thing that if you do it, nobody should violently attack you for doing it. That's all it means. It doesn't mean it's good. It doesn't mean it's a good idea. It doesn't mean it won't come back to bite you in the butt. It just means it doesn't justify a violent response from somebody else. So you have a right to sit on your butt all day watching TV eating Twinkies. Does that mean it's healthy? No. Does that mean nobody should criticize you for it? No. Just means nobody should, send men with guns after you for doing it. But people get so lazy in their thinking that they fall into this weird trap of, well, if the choice is up to me, then whatever choice I make is good. And that's just colossally stupid. And there's a lot of people pointing out how the immediate gratification, zero responsibility, do whatever you feel in the moment crowd is doing a lot of colossally stupid things. And when anybody points it out, people are like, you're trying to control me. Well, no, we're trying to tell you that that's a dumb thing to do and it's not even going to help you. We're not forcibly telling you to do anything. So there's a lot of people like Jordan Peterson who say a lot of good, useful advice to a lot of people about, don't focus on being a victim and learn to work hard. I could point to 100 different people with 100 different messages and they often overlap. But expressing all the cultural things that lead to a person actually feeling fulfilled and happy and having a long, happy life and healthy relationships. And there's so many people that their backlash against perceived authority, it's a thing I've mentioned in previous videos, they sort of think that, oh, my parents always told me what to do. Well, now that I can choose for myself, I don't have to pay attention to results or consequences or reality. I'm allowed to choose anything I want. And if reality causes an outcome I don't like, well, then somebody's being mean to me and something's unfair, instead of you're allowed to do dumb stuff and then reap the consequences of it. That's just called reality. And if people explain to you that, yeah, if you screw around all over the place, that in the long run doesn't really help relationships. It doesn't lead, just statistically it doesn't. If you have families where there aren't two parents, or specifically if there isn't a father there, and there's a son growing up without a father, statistically that is way more likely to result in a bunch of problems for the children growing up. That's just a description. And people who think you're oppressing me by describing the outcome of different choices, it's so childishly stupid. Now, you can think people are wrong and say, well, I think you're not taking this into account, and actually that's a result of the, you can have a debate, and also you have the right to ignore people and say, yeah, you can tell me that it's really unhealthy for me to play video games all day with the screen 2 feet in front of me and eating nothing but Twinkies, and I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, you can do that anyway. Nobody has the right to force you to stop. Now, nobody's obligated to give you the money to allow you to do that. if you can't afford to do that, but whatever. Nobody has the right to forcibly stop you. But when the consequences come and kick you in the ass because of the choices you made, nobody's obligated to make up for the direct results of your stupid choices. And so now we have this weird spin in society where people think they're being oppressed if the results of their choices don't turn out the way they wanted. Not because somebody's initiating violence against them, because I would be opposed to that, and I would defend them against that, even if I think their choices are stupid. If there was a Department of Health SWAT team trying to kick down people's doors and make sure they're not eating too many Twinkies, I would be 100% opposed to that. And at the same time, tell people, don't sit around eating Twinkies if you want to have a long, happy life. You'll be miserable. Like, it might be fun for you today, tomorrow, maybe even for a few days. Then it's going to get worse and worse and horrible. And that's not me oppressing you, and it's not reality oppressing you. It's just reality happening. But the reason I don't talk about these things is because the tree on top of the person is what mattered first. The fact that there is a giant coercive ruling class robbing everybody, that is the primary obstacle to people being prosperous. I mean, by a lot. Now, some people manage to work hard enough that even in spite of being immorally robbed by a ruling class, they're still financially successful. Good for them. But the fact that you have to work as hard as you have to do to get there is because of the people believing in the legitimacy of a giant parasitic ruling class that robs everybody. And a giant parasitical ruling class that authorizes monetary policy by like pseudo, not really government, private banks and the Federal Reserve and that whole thing that like I rarely even get into that. I did make a video called How to Be a Crook ages ago, which talks about how the Federal Reserve is the most effective financial crook in the history of the world, and other central banks can do that. But I don't usually talk about that because, again, if there wasn't the belief in authority, that wouldn't happen. Like, if there wasn't a belief in authority and there wasn't the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, if somebody says, we're the central bank, you have to use our currency, and everybody goes, no. Well, that was easy. Like, that's the end of them. It's only when people are forced to use it, and then anybody who comes along with a different currency gets raided by thugs of the, financial Gestapo. So the people's belief in authority is still the underlying problem. And there's a lot of these things where if that belief goes away and people start thinking like voluntarists, a lot of the other problems are going to fix themselves. And whereas the problems are sort of postponed, like the fact that there's a massive welfare state that rewards a bunch of not good choices and punishes a bunch of good choices is basically giving people an exemption from reality. It's like, well, now if you have a zillion kids out of wedlock, you'll get a bigger check. We're literally subsidizing people having kids out of wedlock and without both parents there. Culturally, that's really dang destructive. And it's why people like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams have correctly pointed out that the welfare state damaged Black American communities more than literal forced segregation did, which was like horribly, overtly nasty and unjust. And that was still less destructive to to a lot of Black American families than the welfare state that pretended to be there to help people. So my focus is always removing the giant monstrosity to let reality actually apply. Because talking about all the cultural things when there's this giant violent beast called government that's distorting all the incentives and all the disincentives, it doesn't work to be responsible and hardworking and, you might get robbed and you need their permission to do this. And there's nothing like a free market and there's nothing like open competition. So if you're like, I can make a good product, I'm going to get right to it. Well, good for you. You're probably doomed. Because you'll need a license on this and a tax on that, and all the big corporations just petition government to pass a law that makes it so you can't stink and do it. So your work ethic in a completely non-free economy well, you may be able to circumvent and dance through enough of it to be prosperous and successful anyway. And if so, good for you. Outstanding. It's like if you're surrounded by crooks and still manage to be financially successful, good for you. Now, if you're financially successful by way of the crooks, which a lot of businesses and individuals are, a lot of the richest people are rich as a result of using immoral government violence to their benefit, either politicians who are just direct beneficiaries of theft and buying corruption and all that fun stuff, or they have an actual business that produces something, but then they use government violence to squash the competition. But it mangles the whole equation. So there's a ton of cultural things that really are important, like the importance of families has sort of exploded. Even something, and this is something I've seen myself, even something as simple as the importance of living in a place where you know your neighbors and you actually have a community, which, by the way, I don't now, and I haven't for many, many years, but I grew up in a little community. It was a little church community. I'm no longer a member of that religion, but it was really cool knowing a bunch of people, and you're there to help each other, and people know what's going on, and, there's downsides, the gossip fest, all that stupidity. But I think it's sad how much was lost when people move so often that a huge number of people don't know their neighbors and don't have a community. And it's sort of like, well, we're all crowded together. There's lots of people around us, but we're all kind of sort of pretty close to being alone because we don't know the people around us. I think societally and psychologically and culturally, that has a lot of downsides to it. Now, people have the right to do that. They have the right to move around and do stuff like that. But a lot of the incentives that mess up the most useful cultural and societal choices, they're messed up by the ruling class. They're messed up by government and legislation and stuff. So anyway, I thought I'd just make this video because I think a lot of people, they decide that because I'm not talking about a bunch of cultural things and racial things and family things and relationship things, then I must either have no opinion about it or I don't care. And that's not at all true. But I don't want to focus on that because I think that focus doesn't matter right now because all of humanity has this giant fallen tree of statism crushing it to death. And until that moves, we're not even free to learn from our mistakes. Because right now you have government rewarding people for their mistakes and glorifying people for stupid shit and praising people and, oh, you're so awesome and brave for doing something colossally self-absorbed and narcissistic that isn't helping anybody, and you get all famous. Meanwhile, the guy who's just like trying to do a job and work hard to provide for his family is getting taxed on his property and taxed on his income and taxed every time he buys anything, working his butt off and, well, I'm going to build a deck. Well, you can't. Now you have to go to war with the township because you didn't pay them however many $100 to get permission to build a deck on your own thing. Like, there are so many things warping human behavior that are completely artificial and are being injected into humanity by government that I don't think people are really in a place where most people can just learn from reality. So to me, it really is like, if you have a bunch of animals that have been caged for all their life and you open the doors and let them go, most of them don't know what to do. They're so used to a setting where none of the normal aspects of reality apply. So they learned how to act inside a completely fabricated artificial setting. And they don't know how to act in the real world because they've had no experience and no practice at that. And so when the belief in statism falls and crashes and burns, and I've said this before, that isn't the end. We're not done. Now we're at utopia. No, now humanity can literally start because it doesn't even count as being civilized. I mean, you can argue about what that term means. It doesn't count as being moral and humane until there isn't a giant, violent, parasitical ruling class. So then it will basically be like this entire population of mostly people who are mentally children and don't know what the hell they're doing. And then they'll have to figure this stuff out. The thing is, in a free society, people have room to figure this stuff out. They aren't having government force stupid ideas and stupid opinions on everybody. People can try it. And if over here you want to have the hippie, free love, drugged out of your mind constantly little commune, like you're allowed to, nobody should forcibly stop you, you may quickly find that, yeah, in the long run, that doesn't actually make people happy and it doesn't lead to good relationships. There are pieces of it that may be good and useful. And if you want to do the traditional thing, you may find, yeah, that's good in a bunch of ways. And there's some ways that maybe we should rethink the way we raise kids, because even the thing of parents going, because I said so, that's not teaching them to be responsible or thinking individuals. That's teaching them to be domesticated animals. And then when they grow up and leave, like what guidance did you teach them so that they can think for themselves and actually understand why some choices are going to be good for them and some aren't, rather than just, you do what I say. So there's a huge number of cultural things that people will still need to figure out, but they can't right now because the giant fallen tree of government is sitting on top of everybody. And that's why that's what I focus on, like almost nonstop and almost without exception, unless you count this video, because now I'm talking about it. But I'm very often tempted to weigh in on a zillion different cultural things, and I don't. I make myself not do it because I think all of those are a distraction from the main thing that has to happen right now. I don't argue with the guy under the tree about how, yeah, actually fat isn't really the problem. Like processed foods and sugars is more of a problem. Some fats are actually very necessary. Well, let's have a debate about that. Let's not. There's a tree on top of you. Like when we get to the point where there isn't a tree on you, maybe we can talk about that other stuff. But until the giant fallen tree of statism is off of society, in public at least, I'm going to keep harping mainly on removing the tree. And I mean, I love to see other people talking about the cultural things and the understanding of human nature and relationships and all that stuff. But I'm just not doing it myself because to me, right now, that isn't the immediate emergency thing that really matters. So I'm going to get back to bashing statism. Yeehaw.